For a period of time, we saw a lot of unnecessary reboots to franchises that were perfectly fine just the way they were. But recently, we've been seeing reboots and sometimes sequels to movies that were not necessarily all that great. A prime example was Top Gun 2 years ago, and Glen Powell contributes to yet another bad franchise getting a facelift and a do-over in the modern era of film. I would say compared to Top Gun Maverick, Twisters is an even greater example of improving upon a weak first movie. Since Twister from 1996 is not some decent movie, it's pretty bad. I know someone is gonna go into the comments and be like, "You don't understand, man. Twister back in 96 was the shit, bro. You kids don't understand the pure cinema of those days." I really don't give a shit, because this is YouTube, and no matter what I say, I'm always gonna make someone mad. It is impossible to go without having enemies in this space. But when I say Twister was a bad movie, it's not because I'm judging the movie and its CGI by modern standards. It's because the writing in Twister is just plain bad. The characters are incredibly cheesy, and they literally come off as NPCs. The drama is very obviously manufactured, and the movie's only charm is that it's old. If this movie came out today, you would clown it. The only cool thing Twister had was the opening scene, but from there, it just gets progressively worse. I honestly think Twister would have been a much better film if they just decided to make it into a comedy. Since it's already kind of funny, although it's unintentional, you might as well lean into it and make it a really fun, weather comedy type of movie. But now let's move on to Twisters. I'll be honest with you guys, I wasn't super excited that they were going back to this franchise since I thought the original wasn't that good, and I think it was best as a one and done. But now that I've seen the movie, I actually think they did a pretty good job. There are some flaws and it's not a great movie by any means, but it's still an improvement over the original. Granted, there is not much to beat. And when it comes to tornado movies, I think this is about as good as it'll get. Let's start with what Twisters does well, before delving into what I don't like about this movie. To start off with the positives, this movie obviously looks fantastic. For a lot of people, Oklahoma is a boring state that you just drive through to get somewhere else, and I can relate to that since I've done that plenty of times. But I do think there is this rich beauty to Oklahoma, with its luscious fields, beautiful rain, and history of tornadoes, and I love the way this movie presents this landscape. It's pretty nice to see some movies exploring Oklahoma, especially with Killers of the Flower Moon and now Twisters. I also love the charm behind these characters, and they feel a lot less flat than the original. Tyler originally comes off as a pompous adrenaline junkie, only in it for the fame, but as the movie progresses, we do see some complexity behind his character, and Glen Powell does a great job of presenting this in his performance. The same can be said for the other characters, whose temperaments are competently justified by the film, but the star of the movie is undoubtedly Glen Powell. The movie also fleshes out areas that were bland in the original. A great example is the antagonist in this film compared to Twister. Don't get me wrong, I love Cary Elwes, but the writers just made his character evil in the original because he steals ideas, is in it for the fame, and is a corporate shill. That is a pretty basic villain, and there's not much more to it besides that. The antagonists in Twisters, though, feel far more evil and realistic since they are after purchasing land just after tornadoes have struck, and this feels like a much more believable and evil protagonist that we can more heavily relate to. Warning, we are going to get into some spoiler territory here, so if you want to see this movie without spoilers, then feel free to click off the video now. I appreciated that this movie didn't force a romance between its characters. It's very common for movies to do this, but I like that Twisters stays away from this and it lets things be implied rather than hitting you over the head with it. And this allows the movie to be more focused on the conflicts at hand, rather than having to delve into a subplot about a dramatic relationship. I still do think Tyler and Kate probably get together after the credits roll, but I appreciate the movie not shoving this down our throats. It's refreshing to see more movies realizing that a romance is not necessary to have a good film. Alright, now let's move on to the issues with this movie, and all of it can be summed up into one word: writing. The writing in this movie, on the surface, is acceptable, but the more you dig into it, the more flaws you begin to notice. I gave this movie some props for fleshing out the antagonists, but if I'm being honest, the whole operation doesn't really make sense. Maybe I'm just missing something, but why does Riggs, the corrupt real estate guy, bother funding expensive tornado research when the only data he cares about is how much he can lowball devastated homeowners? Like, why would he bother funding this super expensive scientific project on tornadoes when all he cares about is go to this town, find out how cheap we can buy these properties, and then I'll make millions off of these investments? Maybe Javi went to Riggs and made a deal with him to help him with finding low-value properties in exchange for the tornado research, but I still think Riggs would just be like, the research is not worth the money it costs, and I can just find somebody else to buy cheap destroyed land for me. I was discussing this with my friend yesterday, and he gave me a good point as to why Riggs might do this. Riggs might be funding the research as a front for his operation. In other words, it's just an excuse to have people scouting this area and scrounging it as fast as possible so other buyers can't get the land before Riggs. But the movie doesn't elaborate on this point at all, and this is just an ad hoc solution we came up with on our own. Ad hoc? Video essay word. Speaking of which, Glen Powell can give me his ad cut. If you want to know the real reason behind Riggs funding the research, it's so it can act as a plot device for Javi to give the data to Kate and Tyler so they can finally have a 3D model to finalize their experiments with. There's also a few other flaws in the writing. I don't understand why the bad guys, Javi and his crew, don't bother having anchors in their truck. Like, is this some hidden tech or something? Riggs is this multi-million-dollar investor who provides them with state-of-the-art equipment, but they can't even have something as simple as claws in their trucks to keep them tethered to the ground during tornadoes when they're literally tornado chasers? Somehow the YouTuber in the movie is more professional than the educated people? On top of that, they need anchors, and we see how much these things save your ass in the movie. And the close call that Javi has, where his truck flips over, could have been totally avoided if his truck had this tool. And this is literally a staple in most tornado chasing trucks. Look, I'm no genius, but I think the tornado is gonna lift the car off the ground, man, I really do. I think a few anchors would really help in solving this problem. This is the most obvious plot hole in Twisters, and if you said this breaks the immersion of the movie for you, I honestly can't blame you. There are a few other writing issues I had with this movie, but these are much smaller. There is a few plot convenient moments, and there are some themes that seem to be getting established, but then they get dropped off at the wayside. I'll give you a few examples. Early on, we see Tyler and his crew talking about how they've seen more despite not being educated, and I thought we would get more on what it means to be truly learned and whether formal education makes someone competent. I was excited for this idea to be elaborated on in the film, but it just goes nowhere, and they never make anything out of it besides this scene toward the beginning of the movie. There is also a scene where Tyler talks about how everything has to be perfect for a tornado, and the formation of one is part science and part religion. And I think we even see a woman praying during a tornado scene, but I wish they made more out of this religion theme. The original also had religious references, with a character called Preacher who talks about the F5 being the finger of God. But both of these movies underexplore the religious side in my opinion. But putting aside this wasted potential of Twisters in the substance department, I still do like this movie, and I think most people will have a good time watching this in IMAX, since it's really meant for the spectacle, and we don't see tornado movies that often. Is this movie amazing? No. But it's probably the best tornado movie we have, and again, there is not much competition there. I am generally against reboots, but I honestly don't mind if Hollywood goes back to movies that weren't so good or had wasted potential, and they try to make new versions that can make the most out of these concepts. Overall though, Twisters is a decent movie that you will probably only watch once, if at all, and you will enjoy your time with it. But after seeing this movie, I guess the real Twisters were the handjobs Glen Powell got along the way. Let me know your thoughts over this movie in the comments below, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.